September executive meeting here at the Luttrell Room at County Hall. Just to remind colleagues that it's only executive lead members present in the room who are taking decisions at this meeting. Others in attendance are here to provide advice to the executive. The agenda and papers have been published on the council's website in advance of the meeting, and there'll be an audio recording of the meeting that will be published on the council's website in due course. Today's meeting is run using a hybrid format. Those executive lead members and key officers who are physically present here at County Hall. Key officers include the Chief Executive, Executive Director of Strategy, Workforce and Localities, the Executive Director for Resources and Corporate Services, and the Monitoring Officer. And other elected members and officers may physically be in the room, or they may be joining to speak on specific agenda items. And the meeting is being broadcast, and therefore other members of the public and partners can observe the meeting remotely. Those of you who are in a hybrid fashion, please can you only use the meeting chat for the purposes of the meeting, primarily to indicate that you wish to speak, though preferably can you do so by raising your hand if you're able to do that using that function. Please only speak at my invitation, and can you say your name before speaking. Can I remind those people online also of the importance of turning off microphones and cameras when not speaking. Having said all of that, I notice Councillor Seeb, you have your hand up. Is there a pressing issue?
No, that's an administrative cock-up. I apologise.
Okay, the first administrative cock-up of the day. So congratulations on that one. Item 1, we have apologies for absence. We have apologies from our new lead member for Environment and Climate Change, Councillor Dixie Dart, who had a prior engagement in her diary before her elevation. Are there any other apologies from executive lead members or officers? Not seeing anything. Item 2 is declarations of interest. Other than those relating to city, town and parish councils, which are on the website and available for inspection, am I seeing any declarations of interest? I am not. And minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of August. I'm to invite members to consider those minutes and approve any alterations for signature. Are there any proposed alterations, please? Can I see a proposal to accept those minutes? Councillor Ruddle, seconded Councillor Leishon. Those in favour from executive members, please. Those against, that's clearly carried. I assume there's something for me to sign because there's something in front of me. Okay. Which brings us on to public question time. Councillor Lee Redmond has asked if he can ask an urgent question, and I have accepted that we will do that under public question time. Good morning, Lee.
Chair, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to ask this question around the RAAC issue and its impact in Somerset. It's become apparent over the past week that this government may have failed to issue sufficient guidance or funding to local authorities with regard to the school estate around RAAC and its potential impact on the safety of our young people when learning, along with the poor oversight during the building and handover process for Haygrove School. The uncertainty and concern around this accumulated failure has meant that some of our young people's education is being impacted again. While parents are rightly concerned about their child's education, more importantly, in some cases, their safety while learning, I understand that non-local authorities' school properties will be the responsibility for the Multi-Academy Trust, or the trust they sit under. I'm aware that our amazing officers have been reaching out to help where they can, despite no responsibility to do so. My questions are, could the executive members provide an urgent update on the position for local authority and, where known, academy schools in Somerset? Can the executive members provide an indication of current plan of action where we have a responsibility and for those where we do not? Can we understand any financial impact on the council that this situation may have? And a final question around the wider council property estate. Can the executive member for property please provide an indication of where in our wider estate RAC may be present? Chair, thank you for the opportunity to ask the question.
Thank you, Lee, for the question. And can I just take the opportunity to thank all the officers of this council and all the staff that are in the academy trusts, the teachers, and also the children for their patience while we resolve these issues, particularly Haygrove School. As soon as I found out, was straight in touch with the CEO of the trust there to offer whatever help that we could give to that trust. It is a truly worrying situation that Haygrove School is in, that a building so new is now deemed to be unsafe for our children, and it's such a significant part of that school. Those children's education has been disrupted hugely by COVID and strikes, and now this. I'm very acutely aware that urgent action needs to be taken to make sure that those young people get the best education possible. I'm going to hand over to Councillor Munt initially to respond to your questions as they pertain to our schools.
Thank you, Bill. I'd echo your comments, of course. And I'd like to thank Lee for his question. Sorry, I'm getting an echo. Sorry? Okay. I am indeed echoing. Okay, fine, thank you. So as a local authority, we have responsibility for the condition, as you say, of local authority maintained school buildings. The Academy Trusts and the Department for Education has responsibility for many of the schools in the county. And then there's another set of schools the Diocese of Bath and Wells has responsibility for. They're the voluntary aided schools. So when the risk of RAC became clear, and I'm going to use RAC as a shorthand, as everybody knows that, it's the light concrete. When it became clear at the end of the last decade, the then County Council reviewed our school building records in line with Department for Education guidance at that time. The reviewing concluded that there was a low probability of RAC being present in Somerset's local authority maintained schools. In the light of new guidance that came from the Department for Education in the last academic year, earlier on this year, a new programme of on-site investigation began across the local authority maintained schools to test the earlier studies with the intention of demonstrating conclusively that no RAC is present. This programme covers 108 of the schools for which we are responsible and has not yet concluded, but to date, all of the on-site surveys where they have been required have found no evidence of RAC in local authority maintained schools. The latest programme was initiated early in 2023, with the first surveys on site in June this year. And we're fully confident at this stage that there's no RAC present in 40 of those 108 schools. And survey work is well underway across a number of other sites. No RAC has been identified at any of our 108 schools to date. However, one academy school run by a trust, it's the Oak Trust, special school, I've got, it has that's not the right, the name of that school. Selworthy, thank you. That's right, I've got a spelling error here. Selworthy Special School, run by the Oak Trust, has identified RAC in one site since the letter was initially sent. So that's the letter. So we expect that school to open tomorrow to all but one class, and later on this week, that school will open to all that remaining class. So in the past few days, we have had speculation about RAC in local schools, with suggestions that it could be present in the buildings of Milford Infant School and Bridgewater College Academy and Brimore schools. And there are a number of other schools that have been named as well. This is incorrect, and I'd really like to discourage any such speculation. It really does not help teachers to teach, leaders to lead, children to learn. Bridgewater College Academy, for instance, has assured us that both that place and Brymore have no, their buildings have been surveyed, and that's been done in the last 15 months, sorry, and they're absolutely confident that there's no RAC present in their estate. And we're following up on the others, but we believe there's no case at the moment for any that speculation to have taken place. In response to your second question, Lee, following the change in the Department for Education's risk assessment last week, officers in the Strategic Asset Management Department have worked with our structural engineer contractor to accelerate the survey programme. We're targeting the completion of initial surveys at all 108 sites over the next fortnight. Some further investigations may be necessary following the initial survey programme, where structural components are more difficult to access, and these follow-up surveys may take longer to complete, of course. No RAC has been identified at any of our school sites to date, and we hope the survey programme will enable us to rule out conclusively the presence of RAC in our schools. If any RAC is identified through the remainder of the programme, we will follow DFE advice, the Department for Education's advice, and the recommendations of our structural engineers to mitigate any risk to students and staff. I'm going to hand over now to Ros Wyke, if I may. Thank you.
Thank you. You're asking for the financial impact on the council of this situation. The latest survey programmes currently forecast to cost about 80,000, but the figure is likely to increase depending on the amount of detailed follow-up investigation work required. If any RAC is identified, then the financial impact would increase further, though at this stage we clearly hope that won't be the case. This cost is an in-year pressure on the Strategic Asset Management Department budget. No funding for the investigation work on RAC has been provided by the government. I'll hand over to Fed to take the next.
In relation to the council's housing estate, so in particular in the north and the west, we own and manage 10,000 homes through our housing service. The majority of these homes are traditionally built houses, flats and bungalows using well-established techniques and materials. Concrete slab construction methods are present in some of our housing estates, but with relatively few large blocks, we believe that the risk of RAC being present is likely to be low. Additional verification work is being undertaken by our housing service just to provide assurance in this area.
And one final comment on your question. Somerset Council has a significant operational and leased estate. Officers in the Strategic Asset Management Department have undertaken an initial data review of over 1,000 buildings and have commissioned some follow-up surveys as a result. Again, no RAC has been identified to date. However, we have been prioritising work on schools, and it will take some time before we have a totally comprehensive view of the risk posed by RAC in the non-school part of the estate as well as the school one. We continue to review health and safety, executive and other relevant sector guidance as the national response develops in this very challenging area.
Thank you.
Can I just have a quick?
Councillor Redmond, you'd like to respond?
Only a quick point, Chair. I'm conscious. Thank you for the opportunity to ask the question during the public question time in this meeting. Obviously, the situation is evolving. What I will ask is it possible to have a written response, and I'm sure that should be shared with all members so that they can at least be aware of where they are and understand everything in their own divisions, etc. And I'm sure you will all be striving, Chair, to make sure that members are kept involved and up to date of all information relating to this.
Absolutely, but please be aware this is a dynamic situation. And so any member briefing will probably be out of date within moments of it being issued. I'll go to Councillor Munt if she wants to add anything to that response.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. I take your point. We are hoping to produce some sort of all-member briefing this afternoon after this meeting. It is dynamic, that situation, but that will be the situation. And we've already issued one. We'll issue one this afternoon. No doubt we will be issuing more. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Redmond, for your question. Councillor Slocum, I see you've got your hand up. I've not had notification of an urgent question that you'd like to have asked.
Oh,
I'm in an incredibly
apologize.
good mood this morning, so I'll add a little bit of latitude and allow you to come in if it's brief, please.
Chair, I completely appreciate this very, very much. I just, it's good to hear about the RAC. It's so good to know that everyone's on it. Obviously, as a ward councillor for Haygrove, one of the ward councillors, we've been heavily involved prior to me going away. I went away and then it all came out. And obviously with the MP as well, Ian Little-Granger, we've been looking at the school, especially Haygrove. And obviously we're very concerned about the emotional impact on the young people, staff and parents. So I know this is not part of this, but I just wanted to raise that because that is a very, very big concern. But as a ward councillor, I'll do all I can as well to keep up to date with everything. And I'm talking with the governors and obviously the head and keeping it abreast of everything as well. So just wanted you to know that we are working as hard as we can to see what we can do as councillors for Somerset Council.
Thank you, Councillor Slocum. As you'll be aware, a small part of my division also has Haygrove catchment within it. I was trying not to raise it as a local ward issue, or the fact that I taught at the Bridgewater College Academy for many years, and I'm so glad to hear that the building wasn't going to fall on top of me as well at any point during that. Councillor Munt.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to really make it terribly, terribly clear to everybody that the closure of Haygrove is absolutely nothing to do with RAC. It's a completely different situation. The school was handed over by the Department for Education to the Trust in late 2020. And to be fair, I believe that the Trust has been raising concerns from day one about the state of that building and its capacity and its integrity. What I would say, actually, Jill, thank you for the comments that you made, but I've been involved for over the last several weeks of offering support of everything that we can do. I know we don't have to do anything. We could actually just ignore it, but we're not going to do that, are we? So we have offered significant support wherever it's needed to the governors and the leaders, to anybody who's involved in Haygrove, and we will do whatever we can within our capacity. We're very aware that the Department for Education is financially responsible, but all of us recognise the emotional impact that this will have not only on the young people who would have hoped to have been in Haygrove today, and forward, and this is going to take some, I suspect, but I'm not a professional, but I imagine it's going to take 2 or 3 years to sort out. And we need to look after the teaching staff, the leadership. We need to look after everybody, the parents and the carers who are involved in Haygrove. It's a catastrophic thing to happen, and no doubt we will be seeking whatever support that we can, whomever we can work with to help those at Haygrove, we will do just that. But the Department for Education, of course, is fully financially responsible, but we do what we can in order to move things along, because very often at a local level, one knows more about who can sort things out. But thank you for your concerns.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, it was really important to me that all 10 local members that were impacted by this were kept in the loop really early on, and so that we're able to add that local dimension as the councillors on the ground. Okay, we do also have a series of questions from Mr. Alan Debenham, which we will take under the item 7, I believe it is, on the agenda at that time, as most of them pertain to that item. So we are moving on now to item 5 on our agenda, which is the annual approval of our statement as sole shareholder of homes in Sedgemoor. And can I invite Councillor Federica Smith-Roberts to introduce this item? Good morning, Fed.
Thank you, Bill. So I will keep this short and sweet. We are the sole member of Homes in Sedgemoor, so we have a duty as the corporate body, the council, to approve the annual accounts of Homes in Sedgemoor and also endorse the appointment of the external auditors, and that's what this report is asking us to do. So I present it to committee.
Okay, I was wondering whether Chris or Dave Baxter wanted to add anything, Chris?
There is very little to add. I mean, it's a relatively short report. As Federica has mentioned, the council is sole shareholder. Homes in Sedgemoor own approximately, it's not own, you own 4,000 properties just over, which are managed by the arm's length management company, Homes in Sedgemoor. You have various duties as shareholder. In May each year, you appoint representatives to the board. They go forward to the annual general meeting of Homes in Sedgemoor, and now we are you are agreeing two other elements, which, as Federica has mentioned, is the approval of last year's accounts and the auditors for this year. So that is your role, and they go forward. Your decision goes forward to the annual general meeting of Homes in Sedgemoor, which is taking place later this month. So it is relatively short and sweet.
Thank you, Chris. Any other comments, questions, or points by members of the executive or associates? Not seeing anything. Anything from anybody else in the room? Not seeing anything. Anything online? Not seeing anything. I did have a question, which I think is probably more appropriate for the AGM, so I'll leave it for them for the sake of time and expediting these meetings. So can I see a proposer for this? Councillor Smith-Roberts, and a seconder, Councillor Ruddle. All those executive lead members in favour, please. All those against? Thank you very much. So we move on to agenda item 6, which is the Somerset Council Consolidated 2023-23 Outturn Report, which is pages 57 to 170, and an additional appendix as well has arrived with us this morning. Councillor Lysholm, would you like to introduce this, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. So I'll start with the apology for the appendix that was missing from the papers and was sent out actually yesterday. It was also sent to the Corporate and Resources Scrutiny Committee, so it had been published online through Somerset Council website, but my apologies that one appendix was missed from the ModGov papers. This is a long anticipated paper. We have been Somerset Council since the 1st of April. Sometimes that feels like 2 weeks and sometimes it feels like 2 years. But this paper includes all of the outturn reports for all 5 councils. And we have, of course, already published the statement of accounts for the 5 councils and also for the pension fund. Also includes the appendices that are the reserves position for all of the predecessor councils and the capital programme outturn for each of those 5 councils too. And we also have the HRA, Housing Revenue Account, outturn reports for the former Sedgemoor District Council, as we've already heard this morning, and Somerset West and Taunton Council. It is a considerable number of appendices. They're very interesting to read, not just for the figures, but also for the different style of each of the reports coming from the different councils. So I think we have an opportunity there to actually look through the different styles and see how we wish to pursue our house style for Somerset Council. They also demonstrate very clearly why it has been such a huge amount of work for the finance teams to get the current year's budget onto Microsoft Dynamics. It is very easy to put those outturn reports next to each other, particularly for the 4 district councils, and see the completely different way of presenting the figures under different cost centres and different lines. So my my thanks and tribute to those people who've worked so hard to do that work. The revenue budget overspend for the previous year is slightly less than we were predicting earlier in the financial year, but it is still a very significant amount to be drawn from reserves. Those reserves have increased since 2017-18, but it is a very significant draw on reserves for 22-23. In light of that, 23 million will be moved from the earmarked reserves for the new council to create the new Somerset Council General Fund Reserve, and that will be at the top end of the recommended 30 to 50 million pound recommendation. This executive will receive a report of the Somerset Council earmarked reserves at next month's executive meeting, one of many papers for next month, and that will follow, of course, a full review of those reserves. We're also looking at the capital programmes of the legacy councils and the year-end position of the two legacy councils' HRA capital programmes, and we have consolidated papers there too. As well as looking at an underspend on capital projects, that's the table 7 on page 66, and additional funding, which is item 27 on page 65. We also have a paper of the revised capital programme and carry forward requests. We also have the revised HRA capital programme and the carry forward request for the HRA capital programme. Those will be for this executive to recommend to full council, because they are capital programme, they are full council decisions, and so the executive today will be recommending. So we acknowledge the position where increasing interest rates and the need to refinance borrowing, we will need to rationalise our entire capital programme for Somerset Council. We do know how much work we have ahead of us. We did a lot of work at this time last year when we were drawing papers from across all 5 councils and working, of course, with officers from all the different councils. This time we will be working from the one programme, but the task will not be any easier. Indeed, as each year goes on with interest rates rising and inflation, particularly in the construction industry, it will become more challenging, not less. So some parts of our capital programme are fully funded, some have partial funding, and some would require significant amounts of borrowing. That is all, of course, included in our 17 actions of the medium-term financial strategy. We're also considering today the usable capital receipts of the 5 councils and the current commitments, which include flexible use of capital receipts for the remaining local government reorganisation costs. They are transformational in nature and so are able to be funded by capital receipts. The 2 outturn positions of the HRAs are shown in appendices 3A and 4A. One has an underspend of 400,000, the other an overspend of 200,000. We have further details of capital carry forwards and underspends. Those are all clearly identified in the paper. I want to close my introduction, Chair, by thanking the finance teams who have worked so hard at a time of reorganisation, but also at a time of introducing a new piece of software, Microsoft Dynamics, which will work well for us in the future, but has given us a particular challenge at this year. I would like to hand over to our 151 officer, Jason Vaughan, for further comment, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Just highlight a couple of things, really. In terms of the outturn report, I kind of would apologise for the length of it, but I'm not going to. It's a key document bringing together some vital information from all 5 councils. Just to clarify our audit position then, because that's what the reason why we close our accounts down. They then get subject to external audit, which provides assurance to members that the finances are where we think they are, and also to the public. 21-22, we have now got all outstanding audits signed off. So there are no more outstanding audits relating to 2021. Sorry, I've got my ears wrong there. 2021, there are no outstanding audits. 21-22, we have 3 outstanding audits relating to South Somerset, Sedgemoor and Mendip. And we are working with the auditors to get those signed off as soon as possible. 22-23, we have published all 6 sets of accounts. You might go, why is there 6? The pension fund also is a separate set of accounts as well and subject to external audit. So we are in the process now of going through all of those audits. It's really important. You would have seen all the national headlines around the delays on external audit. We are in a slightly better place than quite a lot of other councils, but having outstanding audits from previous years really isn't a good place to be. I think from the public side of things, it's very bad news. You want to see that your accounts have been reviewed by an external auditor and provided you with assurance on them. Indeed, I want them to sign off by the external auditor and provide me with assurance. So really important that we prioritise this piece of work and get those over the line as soon as possible. Just moving on then, the other area I'd pull out is on page 62, talking about reserves. Quite a hot topic at the moment, I think, following the announcements of various councils around lack of reserves and running out of money. It is a key sign of corporate health for an authority. If you want to see whether an authority is in distress, follow its reserve pattern and where it's going. Are they burning through the money and running out of reserves, or are they actually in a good place? So I just wanted to go through this area because I think it's really key. So the general reserves in table 3 there, you'll see total £26.8 million. That's more than 5% of our net budget, but actually given our profile of risk, given our budget monitoring position, the risk-based assessment and reserves that Council approved in February was a range between 30 million and 50 million. So the proposal is to move 23 million from earmarked reserves into general reserves to put them up to, restore them up to 49.8 million pounds, so at that top end of the range. That puts us in a reasonably good financial position. If I move on then to the other type of reserves, the earmarked reserves, so set aside for particular purposes, table 4 on page 63 sets out the picture. And you'll see on first glance, you'll think we're awash with money. You'll see £288 million and you'll think, what is the problem? If you look closely, actually £131 million of that actually isn't our money. We are holding it on behalf of other bodies, whether that be schools, the LEP and other bodies, Somerset Rivers Authority and people like that. So it's not our money, so we need to exclude that. So our position actually is £156.8 million. Then in table 5 shows, following the transfer of the £23 million, the use in the current year's budget, the adult transformation project that was approved previously, and expect use in 24-25 of reserves set out in the MTFP that was approved in February. Our actual remaining earmarked reserves are £104.9 million. And the full details of all those are set out in Appendix 6 of the report. The proposal in the recommendations is to bring a report back to you at your next meeting in October to actually update that position on the individual earmarked reserves. Each of the councils had sometimes similar name for the same things, such as business rates, but then on other things there are various forms of budget smoothing reserves, MTFP reserves, resilience reserves. So we'll bring them together all into one and set that out for you at your next meeting. So that's the main areas I wanted to highlight. But happy to take any questions or clarify any points.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you, Jason. Just looking around the room from executive lead members or associate lead members initially, Councillor Wakefield.
Yes, thank you. And I would like to express our thanks for all the work that's been carried out. There's a lot of work here. I just wanted to ask Jason whether he could confirm that now we've got the final position, we're in a better state to move forward, because we were, I know, waiting for a lot of figures, and it does make it very difficult to plan the future. So I just wanted your reassurance that puts us in a better position. I know we've got the audits to come, but I just wanted that reassurance.
Yeah, I think when we come on to the report bit later on the agenda around budget monitoring, and in there's the 17 key areas in the financial strategy. A number of those were waiting for us to close the accounts before they could start. So actually now we are in a position we can actually start to progress a number of those. So yeah, it feels a bit of a relief to be at this stage. There's still an awful lot of work to do. But yeah, we are in the starting blocks now to be able to really carry on and do that work that needs doing over the next few months.
Okay, thank you. Just looking around the room for anything else. Okay, moving on to members in the room, and I can see Mandy. Thank you, Mandy.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Couple of questions, really, and obviously I've had the papers really late on the outturn, so I've been scrabbling through them now. It's really difficult to ask pertinent questions when you've just had sight of them. So if I've got any more, if it's okay, I will pop them through to yourself, Liz, and to Jason. But just a couple of things that haven't has been vaguely touched on in questions. The capital programme. There's an in-year variance of over 40 million. In doing so, that puts a pressure on the revenue, so I understand. And it's certainly one of the cautionary notes from CIPFA that you need to progress at speed with capital programmes. Otherwise, as you've outlined, the costs will go up considerably. So my first question is, do you feel we progressed at speed within the year we're talking about? And if not, what are we doing this year to improve that position?
I'd just like to kind of make a preliminary answer, apologise again. That paper will also be at corporate and resources scrutiny tomorrow, of course. The capital programme, I think as the executive meetings run between now and next February, I think we will see a quite significant number of papers attached to the work that we're doing to make this a more sustainable council. And I think that position will unfold as those monthly meetings continue. We're also doing lots of other things like publishing a risk statement. And I'm working with the officers to try and make that as understandable as possible, so that as the executive is making decisions and we move up to budget setting, that people have the context of where the risks are. And so when we're making decisions, they're kind of risk-based decisions and the context is really clear. There's a lot. There's a great deal. There are, as I've already said, there are capital programmes that are fully funded, like the town deals and Levelling Up. But we're seeing all over the country, and I know from the Glastonbury Town Deal Board, where projects are being de-scoped, value engineered, because there is a set amount of money. That money is still there from government, drawn down in a particular and very clear way, but there's no more. And then there are projects that are partially funded, and that is how we work with our partners to ensure that we continue to maximise those opportunities while making sure that the council stays as sustainable as possible. It's going to be, I'd suggest, a balancing act. I don't know, Jason, if there's anything you could add, please.
Yeah, so one of the key actions on page 183 of the paper on budget monitoring tied into the financial strategy is review the capital programme. I think that's really important in two areas. One, having a capital programme that we can afford, obviously. I think the other area, which I think is partly behind your question, one of the issues councils have had generally is delays on capital projects and forecasting the spend the money this year, and actually it doesn't turn out that it's always delayed and it will always be next year type stuff. So one of the things we want to do as part of that review is actually tie down our forecasting and profile of the capital spend in a better way. Traditionally, we've, I think, assumed every scheme starts on the 1st of April. Well, actually, very few schemes start on the 1st of April. So we're looking at sort of trying to get down to quarterly forecasting in a bit more detail than we've done in the past. So I think there is absolutely some things we can do to improve some of the previous practice. It is really important that we set an accurate capital programme. Otherwise, we set aside money for spend on financing of the debt associated with that, that then means we can't spend it on other services, as well as the very real risk that you've highlighted that costs increase, and actually your original sum that you set aside now isn't enough. So absolutely, it's a key area that we need to address.
Thank you. And just one other question, I suppose you would guess it was coming, which is about the reserves, because I've been asking many questions over a period about them. The pull on reserves to cover the overspend is a massive one. I think it's, we'll say 50%, 40% of your actual reserves that were there. And now you're having to move earmark reserves into those reserves. So you've still got a healthy position. So a large percentage of the usable reserves, shall I say, have been used up to balance the budget. My question is, you are pulling from earmark reserves, and I suppose the concern is which earmark reserves, and is that in turn putting anything else at risk because they're earmarked for a good reason, they're there for a specific reason. Is there anything we are not going to be able to do because those earmark reserves have been used to balance the budget? Thank you.
Thank you. Those of us who were county councillors before 22, of course, did note the low level of reserves in 2017-18 and the good work that was done to build up budget volatility reserves as earmarked reserves. Those are the reserves that will move across. Districts also had reserves under various different headings. The one I can recall, of course, from Mendip was called one of them was called, I think actually Somerset Western Taunton, it was called the MTFP Reserve. So that was the point that we were making about them all being called different names. And I think this review of reserves is going to, the earmarked reserves, going to be really important. It is not a sustainable position to keep drawing on reserves. It doesn't matter what they're called, whether they're general fund or earmarked reserves for budget volatility. You only spend them once, and we are very, very much aware of that. Yeah.
And thank you. Just one question following up on reserves. Whether they're earmarked or general reserves, they still are all included in the health and well-being of a council. And wherever they're pulled from, if I'm correct, it can still affect the resilience of the council, even if it's from earmarked. Thank you.
If I may just say, I find it really helpful too to understand the difference between usable and non-usable reserves, because within earmarked reserves there are, as Jason has already explained, there are usable reserves and there are plenty of reserves that are non-usable because that is not the council's money to spend. It can help with internal borrowing position, as we know from previous years, but they are not usable reserves for this council. And I think if I was going to ask one thing, it took me a few years really to get my head around that. And I think if I was going to ask one thing for the report next month, is that we have absolute clarity on what is a usable reserve and a non-usable reserve. I think it's been helpful.
Thank you. I totally agree with that. It would be helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, continuing to move around the room for any questions. Not seeing anything online, and I'm not saying anything online. Okay, which brings us to the recommendations, which are set out in the paper to note the overall overspend, agree the requested carry forwards, note the opening position of the general fund reserve and to approve the transfer of earmarked reserves, note the opening position of Somerset Council earmarked reserves, agree the addition and amendments to the capital programme, note the completed capital projects, note the position on capital receipts and commitments, note the outturn positions of the housing revenue accounts in both Sedgemoor and Somerset Western Taunton former districts, approve the capital carry forwards relating to Sedgemoor District Council's HRA, and to approve the reduction of the capital programme no longer required within the previous Somerset West and Taunton HRA. And we recommend to Council, because it's not our decision, to note the year-end position of the Legacy Council's General Fund capital programmes and approve the carry-forward requests and revised capital programmes in Appendix 7. and to note the year-end positions and legacy council's HRA capital programmes, and approve the carry forwards and revised capital programme attached to Appendix 7A. Do I see a proposer for that? So I've got Councillor Lysholm. Do I see a seconder? I've got Councillor Ruddle. Can I see those executive lead members in favour, please? And those against? That's clearly carried. Thank you. We move on to item 7, and as at this point that I said we would take the public questions from Alan Debenham. Alan, just a reminder, you have 3 minutes. Also to remind you that normally we would take 3 questions. You seem to have submitted 5 because we love you so much. We'll overlook that this time. However, could you just remember that in future? Thanks very so much.
Oh, good morning. Good morning to everybody. Nice to be back in County Hall instead of the canal side. Anyway, the questions have arisen largely from reading a press release, which was, I think, published part of it in the Gazette, saying that this Somerset Council was in danger of a Section 114 statement in the next 2 years, and basically saying that there's a very serious problem with the potential of big cuts that probably we have never seen before in, and I've been campaigning against public services cuts, whether it's local government or national government, for many years. And this is why I'm here today, really, as an active Democrat since the age of 17. And I'm going to be 83 very shortly. So I'm very pleased to carry on with the help of the County Gazette, of course, as you probably noticed. Anyway, the first 2 questions, it really was demoralising to sort of hear that the County Council is on its knees, sort of thing. It's possibly going to have to proclaim a Section 114. And I read every day, well, I watch Parliament probably every day in select committees, and I read the papers. And if you compare what is issued from this government about the billions and millions of pounds that are being dedicated to adult social care and also to children's social care, and then you compare that with the statement from Councillor Lation that some of the main reasons why we were possibly facing a 114 is because of very big extra spending on adult social care and children's social care. So the 2 don't match. And maybe I'm just trying to find out with these first two questions as to what the heck is happening, because it doesn't make any sense. Question 3 is basically saying, in my recollection, the Liberal Democrats have always campaigned on more independence for local government, and in particular talking about local income tax and local sales tax, going back to the Layfield Commission report in 1979. In fact, as you probably most of you know, I've been 20 years, nearly 20 years as a Taunton Deane councillor, starting in 1973, and I've been about 50 years as a parish councillor. But recently, of course, Staplegrove Parish Council was abolished, so I'm no longer a parish councillor. But anyway, question 3, I would like a response on it. I don't really want to read it. It's basically saying, why are we still allowing the situation in this country, which is different from other like countries in Europe, possibly the world, where local government is not real local government? I mean, you have to bid for things now. Now they've taken away all the general revenue funding. You have to bid for things, which is corruption of the highest kind, really. And so I would like a response from the Liberal Democrats. I would like them to grab the cudgel and start campaigning to get the situation changed.
You're over time already.
Oh, sorry. Can I quickly say, on question 4 is because of the phosphates issue that, as you know, the government have fallen in on it, which I would like a response on that. And the last question about nuclear power and nuclear bombs. I've been a member of CND since I was 16, and I've been an active member of the Stop Hinkley campaign, so I do declare an interest on that question. But the statement from Councillor Legislation did really puzzle me, because the worst decision that's ever been taken by this Tory government, as you probably know, going back to the days of Theresa May, and it's supported by the Daily Telegraph and the Daily Mail and papers like that. The worst decision ever taken was to restore the nuclear power programme, and it's disastrous. Hinkley C has already proved that it's disastrous, and it's going to be worse in the future. And the sooner it stops, the better.
Thank you so much for all.
Thank you for listening.
Your questions.
Thank you for
and
my questions.
And thank you for keeping on going at 83. We do appreciate the challenge and your questions. I understand that you were in the River Tone on Saturday morning, having a swim. There we go. Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm sure when you jumped in the river, it raised the tone. Okay. Anyway, I'll stick to being to my current role, I think, not the comedy. Councillor Ruddle, I think the first question's for you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not quite sure what I'm answering now, but I'm going to answer the question you submitted to us, okay? So thank you, Alan, for your question, and how much of this seemingly generous new money and support has found its way to us in adult social care in Somerset. What I can tell you, the Adult Social Care Discharge Fund, we get £3.3 million. The Adult Social Care Market Sustainability and Improvement Workforce Funds, we get 5.8 million, not billion, million, not the billions that are reported, millions. And we also get another grant, which will be in funding for 23-24 of another workforce fund of 3.7 million. Also announced and referred to in the impact of Somerset for 23-24, we will get a small amount, well, 2.7 million. And we get a social care grant of 14.7 million, which is split between children's and adults. And our adult social care precept is 7.3 million. So there are millions, they're not billions. So that's one of the reasons why we are having the issues we're having. I hope that helps, Alan. Thank you.
Tessa, on the children's question.
Thank you. Actually, mine's very quick answer, really, and that is, but I might defer to Jason, who may have a little bit more detail. What I was going to say was the social care grant, which is split between adults and children's, has increased from 24.6 million, as you probably know, last year, to 39.2 million this year. But I'm going to hand over to Jason, if I may, because he'll have the detail on that. Thank you.
Yeah, just to say there's no other direct funding grants for children's as part of that package. There's been lots of national announcements of potential. We haven't seen the cash yet, but I eagerly await it.
Yes, we always eagerly await cash. Maybe more in hope than expectation. I don't know. Anyway, your question 3 is a somewhat political one. Just to point out, you may well remember the Layfield. It wasn't actually a Royal Commission, the Layfield Royal Commission. It was a committee of inquiry, and it was 1976, not 1979. I'm feeling like I'm going back to being a history teacher again. However, I was 8 in 1976, so I don't remember it personally. However, I do take on board fully your comments about needing to pick up that cudgel again. I know that many residents, both here in Somerset and throughout the country, put their faith in Lib Dem administrations to run their local councils, and I'm sure that it will feature more prominently in our national campaigning in the future to have that independence for local government. And thank you for the nudge in that direction. I fully agree with the sentiment behind the question. Councillor White, you're on question 4, I believe.
Thank you. My response is not going to be a one-liner because this is a really serious issue, and I think it deserves a good response. We're currently reviewing the government's proposed changes to the approach to neutrality and their plans to unblock development. However, until the proposed amendments are made to the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, the current legal framework has not changed, and mitigation to ensure that developments are nutrient neutral are therefore still required. The council will continue to work with partners to deliver live projects in advance of any changes coming into effect. This council has been campaigning for change in the nutrient neutrality regulations for some time. We've long felt that the restrictions on new housing was disproportionate in Somerset, where new housing had limited impact in comparison to other sources of pollution, and that other measures were required. We currently have approximately 16,000 new homes held up by these regulations. In addition to the proposed amendments to the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, the government now plans to tackle the underlying sources of nutrient pollution by announcing an environmental package of plans to tackle the underlying sources of nutrient pollution, by announcing an environmental package of plans and further investment to reduce nutrients. The council has been advised, really shifts the focus from the proposed nutrient mitigation fund, and we now provide this, and they will now provide additional funding to Natural England, no longer from the ministry, to take more strategic approach to site restoration on a catchment-wide basis. We understand that Natural England will seek to partner with local planning authorities to deliver nutrient reductions and the associated environmental co-benefits, and we expect to receive further details on this new approach in the next few weeks, including the engagement with local leaders.
Thank you, Councillor White and Councillor Lation.
I'm not sure, Chair, whether you want me to take the next question. Is it the fifth part of Mr. Debenham's question? Is that correct?
Quite happy for that to be yourself who've named, or Councillor White, if you wish to pick that one up.
If Councillor Wyke is willing to pick this up, it does sit under her portfolio, if that's okay, please.
Sorry, I'd read you were named in the question, and you're absolutely right. It fits much more appropriate under Councillor White's responsibility. Sorry.
Okay, fine. I think it's recognising that as a council we cross over many of our portfolios and work collectively. Regarding Hinkley Point C, the siting and the funding model for the new nuclear is prescribed by central government. And whilst I understand why you raised this here, the council's role is to focus on the delivery of requirements contained in the agreed development consent order and associated documents. You are indeed correct that there has been formal delays to the commissioning of units 1 and 2 of the station. EDF have a number of community forums where you may be able to air some of your concerns, and you'll be very much welcome there. Secondly, we're aware of the negative environmental impacts of mining lithium and other scarce materials for the use in batteries and other renewable energy solutions, but mostly all energy options have a negative environmental impact to some degree. I'm sure you recognise that. The imperative to reduce carbon emissions and move away from fossil fuels means that the least worst option must be to consider our preferences in front of us. We're also aware that renewable energy is not just a net zero panacea, and reducing energy consumption is also crucial in obtaining our carbon reduction ambitions. Like so many aspects of addressing climate emergency, there's no one solution, and there are many nuances to be considered.
Very briefly, and it'd be entirely unconventional, but
involved in the nutrient business, there is a £10 million bid to the government for support for the county council project or scheme, not the county council, sorry, the council. But what is the outcome now? Are we cancelling it or carrying on?
I can.
Yeah,
respond to that.
I'm just aware that I'm also seeing comments in the chat from members. Could I just ask that the meeting chat not be used for the purposes of debates? I do appreciate the temptation, and I'm sure I broke that rule when I wasn't chairing meetings on many occasions. But if Councillor White, you could briefly respond to that. And I think that will respond to Councillor Kay and Councillor Osborne's point. And I think once we've got clarity, we will need to have a further brief on this. But if you could just give us an update on where we are now, please.
Certainly. The bid to the department's nutrient neutrality mitigation scheme was, as you rightly say, just over 10 million, and it was for a technical solution, and it was to bridge the gap until the water companies are required to adjust their outflow by 2030. In the statement within the announcement of the various changes, the departments have indicated that they are no longer going to take forward that fund, but actually transfer monies to Natural England and their fund. And so we don't know at this stage whether they will be looking at technical solutions or whether they will just be seeking nature-based solutions. We haven't got clarity. We have asked the question, and we will share that with everybody once we know where the government is going on this one.
Thank you, as always, for your questions, Mr. Debenham. Okay. Oh, she's a diamond, isn't she? Okay, so we move on formally to item 7, which is the 2023-24 budget monitoring report, month 3, end of June 2023, and month 4. I'd like to invite Councillor Liz Lyshawn to introduce the item and highlight key points. Liz, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. You'll see in the very first paragraph of this paper the words very stark and challenging. We have also had Mr. Debenham refer to the press release that went from this council and was published locally and nationally. If we are to understand our situation and deal with it, we need to recognise as early as possible where we are, and we will be taking our own actions. We will expect that we will have some draw on reserves this year, but it needs to be as little as possible. And we will, of course, be looking at government, as a number of councils have already declared Section 114. And we saw Birmingham yesterday, which I hadn't realised was reported on the news as the biggest local authority in Europe, not just the UK. Now, that came as a shock to me, and I'm sure came as a shock to residents and businesses in Birmingham too. So we're looking at the overspend from last year and the need to draw on more than 18 million there. We're looking at projected overspend for this year, which has been apparent for some time, as we had an emerging issues paper at month 2 from Jason Vaughan. We also understand that the lack of budget monitoring in the early months of Somerset Council has given concern to staff and members alike. As a comparator, I found it useful to learn that Dorset Council, when a new unitary council, did not actually have budget monitoring reports for its first 2 quarters. So it was longer without budget monitoring. Of course, the financial position was considerably more stable nationally at that point. So although this is a difficult time for us to go through local government reorganisation, it's also gives us opportunities that we would not have had as 5 individual councils. And I think where we've seen those combined reports of reserves and capital programme, we must see, as well as the risk, the opportunity in the one new council. So we have to hope too that government listen. And I know that many of the councils that have already declared 114 have specific circumstances, and that includes Birmingham. There are other councils that we know who are projecting very considerable savings in this year. And I believe in the next few months, as we move towards Christmas and then budget setting, we will see other upper tier authorities acknowledging that they will not make their projected savings, and that will push them also to further use of reserves and further concern about longer term viability of those councils. So as well as month 3, our Q1 report, we also have an addendum for month 4, and I'm grateful to officers for being able to bring that forward at this point. It is a slightly improved position, but we do know that many parts of our budget monitoring need and will get considerable amounts of work as we go through the next months. And I'm more than hopeful, I'm confident that when we get to Q2, we will have a much more meaningful budget monitoring report for scrutiny and for executive. So all of the lists of the actions of the Directorate Management Team, so a new acronym for us, the DMTs, Directorate Management Teams, to develop financial recovery plans are listed under item 9. This is an extremely challenging position. We're asking as well for the chairs of all 5 scrutiny committees to review the budget monitoring position on those directorates, and we are introducing, well, not me, although I will be there, our finance team are introducing monthly briefings for members, both in the room and online, because it is absolutely essential that all members have access to all of the information. And that started, as you know, Chair, with a briefing from the CEO of SIPFA, and also from Arlen Close Treasury Management advisors. So we will also work towards, I've already mentioned the risk statement. We want to work in a new way, putting all our risk in context for budget setting, but also with greater clarity, and bring it forward so that parish, town and city councils can understand where we are. And we want to do that sooner this year than we did last year, so that we need to make sure the clerks, the chairs and all members of the most local councils in Somerset have a clear view of the challenges here, so that they can consider that when they are precepting. So I'd like to hand over, if I may, Chair, to Jason for any further points. Thank you.
Thank you. So the month 3 report did go to the Scrutiny Committee, the Corporate and Resources Scrutiny Committee meeting on the 8th of August. And the reason why you've got month 4 here is the timing issues. We've brought you the most up-to-date position possible. I think, as Councillor Lashon has said, we will make sure that for the Q2 report, I think we'll have fuller detail across all the pieces. We roll out the Solver budget monitoring tool this month. In terms of the overall position, I was just going to pick up on a couple of things that I think is really important. Section 114 seems to be a topic at the moment, obviously with Birmingham hitting the headlines and the sheer scale of that council. It's worth addressing a couple of things, and hence why some of the recommendations are here, particularly recommendations B, C and D. So B, requesting that all the scrutiny committees review their areas. The Corporate and Resources Scrutiny Committee has responsibility for the budget as a whole, but actually I think it's important that members on those other scrutiny committees are very aware of the financial situation. Also, recommendation C is about member briefings, monthly member briefings, and we're planning to hold those both in person and virtually. One of the common issues when you look at section 114 notices in councils, and some of the reaction is, some councillors say, I didn't know this was coming. We will not be in that position. I've clearly set out some early warning systems. I can kind of spot the iceberg several years out and saying, can we take enough action to avoid hitting the iceberg? That's our position. We're not hitting the iceberg tomorrow, but we can see if we carry on, we will do. And that's a really simple thing. I heard some of the public saying, how can a council go bankrupt? Actually, there's lots of particular reasons around the individual councils. But if you boil it down to a simple thing of why we're starting to see a number of councils raise issues and concerns, it's when you look at our costs and our income. So just looking at our sort of budget, we're a £1.1 billion gross spend, or 493 net budget. When I look at our budget for next year, assuming you put up council tax by 2.99%, our income goes up by 3.7%. The national pay award for staff is likely to be about 5%. What's the increase on our waste contract likely to be? What's our increase on the business rates we pay? Will that be based on the RPI figure in September? When you start looking at all those things, what's the increase in our adult social care? What's going to be? A national study says it's between 10 and 12% for next year. Similar on children's. That's why councils are in trouble. Actually, our expenditure is going up quicker than our income. It's a very simple equation. It's not hard to understand. So that's the heart of the real problem here. It's the national funding that councils get doesn't match the income, the expenditure and responsibilities that we have. So we're setting out a course of action here to try and deal with the challenges we face. Recommendation D, most councils, upper tier councils, indeed districts actually, don't do monthly budget monitoring, formal reporting to committees, so the executive and scrutiny. I was hoping that we might be in a position to be able to rein back some resources and not do that. I don't think that's possible with our financial position. It's a real serious challenge. Therefore, recommendation that you receive monthly updates. So they're some of the key things. Because this is a quarterly report, there are a couple of other areas in the report that I'll just draw your attention to. So on page 217 of the report, we also provide a commentary on our transformational savings and income generation proposals. So these were items that you agreed back in February as full council, a total of £40.9 million worth of savings. You'll see both in the table on that page and then the graph a bit later, how we're progressing against those. So we're saying to you, 72% of those are either achieved or on track. So £29.3 million, pretty confident about. £6.3 million are at risk, and 5.3 currently don't think are achievable. So one of the actions in the report is to say to service directors, if that's the case, what alternatives can you find to address this? The other area to highlight, because it's the quarterly report, is on page 220, and that's around treasury management. We've set out both our debt and investment portfolio, and you'll see how that's changed since the start of the new council. One of the approaches that we are doing as those short-term borrowings mature and become due is actually we're doing internal borrowing. We have some surplus cash and we're using that, so we're not externally funding as much as possible. Clearly that's not totally possible because eventually you run out of surplus cash to be able to do that, but that's been part of the feature of the first quarter. We're in a slightly different place now that we won't be able to continue with that policy, but we are trying to reduce our borrowings as much as possible. And that fits in one of the key actions in the financial strategy of reviewing our treasury activities as well. Hopefully that's a helpful overview of the paper. There's quite a lot of detail on each of the services and where they sit.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you, Jason. I think you've set the context and the scene very well there. Yeah, certainly, we're not about to hit the iceberg. It's on our radar, not necessarily on our horizon yet, but if we are going to avoid, then we need to take responsible and necessary action sooner rather than later. And I do very much take on board the point that you made about national funding does not match the responsibilities that we have. However, those solutions are not in our hands, and we have to focus on the solutions that are in our hands in this context at the moment. And in the context of a paper that was introduced as stark and challenging, I think it's only right and fair that we do go into it in some depth. And I'd like to invite lead members just to look at their own portfolio areas and just update on where we are and what we are doing in order to get a firm grip on the situation. It'll be no surprise that I'll be starting with adult social care. Hello, Dean.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to start off by saying the scale of adult social care is huge and is an essential part of the fabric of our society. It enables and transforms lives. It supports people to live the lives they want to lead and where they want to live. We want social care to help people stay healthy, happy and independent. So I'd like to address the potential £12.9 million overspend in adults' budgets this year. As reported before in early executive, the My Life, My Future savings from adult social care transformation will be achieved over 2 years. However, the profile of this means we will not achieve 4.8 million in this year. We are confident that a £10 million saving will be achieved over the next 2 years. I think you will all agree that we live in unprecedented times. As we've heard today, high interest rates, high inflation, which has put increased pressures on all of our services. These increases could not have been predicted when we were setting our budget last year. However, I can assure you that we are constantly monitoring and reviewing our budget to see how we'll keep spending as low as possible and make efficiencies wherever to control and reduce the current projected overspend. I would also like to point out that adult social care regularly benchmark against neighbouring authorities and national figures, which will show that adult social care spend in Somerset is 14%, below the national average. However, as stated above, we are constantly monitoring not only our budgets, but our services we provide, which identifies 5 key areas where we can make efficient savings within this year. They are as follows: review of high cost personal budgets for people with increased or high needs above the Care Act threshold. Review of high cost placements with a view to joint funding. Void optimisation of current capacity within the market. Review of all interim places and review of all one-to-one places. However, we have to be mindful that any potential efficiencies above may be put under pressure if we have a hard winter. I hope you'll find this report useful and reassuring that we're doing all we can to reduce the budget gap. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dean. Mel, was there anything you wanted to add to what Dean said? No. Okay, that's fine. Tessa, can I hand over to you and your team on children's?
Certainly, thank you. I just want to make a few general points about what may appear to be a lack of information in the children's budget area. As you probably are aware, there are vast amounts of information that we need to rationalise, and that rationalisation has been going on. So if I give you an example, I know that this time last year, there were actually 12,000 budget lines in the education part of the budget, and that has been, we've addressed that, and so there's a lot of the cost centres are rationalised down. I don't know exactly the number that there are in education now, but I know that we're down to 330 cost centres in children's services. That excludes the schools, but covers social care and commissioning and inclusion. So we've got lots of different types of transactions, and all of that information we need to be able to put into something that's much more clearly understood. So at this point, you will have seen that we've identified we've got 8.8 million as an overspend at this point. Everybody is aware of exactly what's happening in their departments and their teams, but that 8.8 million is not an overspend per se against the budget at the moment, but that's the position we believe we are in at the moment. So, and that is, we've focused on external placements in our part of the budget, mainly because that's the area that is perhaps most at risk in children's services, because that's where the most expenses, the costs are escalating on a massive scale. So Just to give you some idea, I wanted to introduce the fact that actually, of course, we have about 500 invoices per month that go out. On about 350 external placements, we have a large number of children who need to be cared for very carefully and very often come into our service at quite short notice. Some of you will be aware that we have some very young children who have come into care just in the last couple of weeks. So we need to care for them, but we don't have necessarily the placements that we would have in foster care if everything was ideal, nor indeed do we have homes in Somerset that children can come to. So all I was going to say was that the accounts, as you see them, budget monitoring, is not as full as either Claire or I would like it to be, but we are getting there. And the introduction of Microsoft Dynamics, and we have another system which is called Solver, which is the reporting tool. Those will all come together and give us much better information, but we're not in a position at this particular moment to have that that information and the reports that you would probably want. So on the whole, our less volatile and less complex areas in the service are likely to be forecast spending in line with the budget. So let's hope that that zero stays near to zero in terms of overspend. But we have to wait until we've got full reporting in place. I don't know whether Claire would do. I'm sure Claire will want to add to that. But if I may, do you want to? Yeah, let's.
Yes, so as Tessa says, the key areas of overspend in children's services are in relation to external placements for children who are in the care system. The reasons for that is that we do not have a large number of children in care, but as a per capita, we're very low compared to other local authorities. However, the pandemic has led to, in all local authorities, including Somerset, an increase in complexity of need. That increase in complexity of need has led to providers being able to choose effectively which children they take because of the volume from other local authorities as well. And that has meant that costs have risen very, very sharply in all local authorities in the country. We are in a national market that happens to be in the local area as well, if you like, because other local authorities will place in Somerset as well as us placing outside Somerset when we can't find placements for our children. We are working on that. We are trying to put some mitigation in place and trying to manage those escalating costs. So we have our Homes and Horizons project with the Shore Trust, which is developing children's homes, therapeutic foster care and therapeutic education in Somerset. That is working well. We have 5 homes currently open, with the 6th being progressed at the moment. That was initially projecting a £1.2 million saving in year. We're now looking at nearly 2.8 because of the number of children we've been able to move into there out of very high cost placements to bring them home. We also are working with local providers to try to develop the local market at value for money in terms of both cost but also the quality of the provision there is for local children. In terms of the private market, people are probably aware that children's homes are often private equity backed. Those private equity partners will sometimes make up to 25–30% profit. Somerset, for some reason, we have identified is overly exposed to the private equity market in terms of its residential children's homes. So we are trying to work with local providers who are providing local homes for local children to manage that market and develop that market in a way that is actually benefits our children and will reduce cost. The other areas that we are concerned about in terms of spend, obviously at the moment they are projecting to budget, is the one that usually does project over is school transport in terms of SEND school transport. Mainstream school transport usually is manageable and projects the budget because we can plan and predict mainstream school transport. The SEND school transport children move into independent non-maintained schools during the year, and transport routes have to be provided, sometimes at extremely high cost for individual children. At the moment, the highest cost route is £40,000 a year for one child. That is their transport cost, not their education costs. because of the complexity of their need and the route that they need to take to school in terms of the type of transport and support they need in that transport. So that we are working with Public Edge Solutions, who are a consultancy, have completed a report on behalf of Children's Services and Transporting Somerset to look at how we can manage those costs down. And we are confident between us that they will be able to do that. They are projecting, I think, 600,000 this year, 2.4 million next year and 2.6 the year after, in terms of looking at how we manage those routes and the way that we transport children to school effectively, particularly in the SEND system.
Okay, thank you. Are there any comments or questions on that? Because there's a number of points that were raised. Do we have a timescale on that budget monitoring coming forwards? Because it's possibly an outlier that I'm seeing here.
What I do know is that we're working closely with Jason and with Liz, of course, I don't know what we would say about timescale, Jason, but I know that we're working. So we monitor everything monthly between the finance team and our team. When we'll have a full set of figures, would I like to say that? No, I wouldn't. Would you?
So the Solver budget monitoring tool that provides more details across the budgets is being rolled out this week, starting this week. So for the Q2 report, that will have all the details in there. For a number of areas, that hasn't been a problem. For those areas where particularly we brought districts together, that's more of an issue to making sure we get the budgets all in the right place.
I appreciate the challenge in bringing that forward with districts. My concern is bringing that forward in a timely fashion in children's. If you're saying Q2, you're saying end of October. Am I doing that correctly?
No, so this month, it's happening now. So that's being rolled out now. So we'll have all that information. All the service directors will have all that information now.
Okay, that's reassuring. Thank you. Okay, next in the report is public health, which is showing no variance on outturn. Adam, do you want to make any comment?
Yeah, just to say we will be managing the budget very tightly to achieve no overspend, which is not easy with the lack of funding we get from the grant. We've experienced significant inflationary increases, as you can imagine, with some services, and the public health grant has barely increased. So we are trying very our best to make sure we don't have any overspend, but it is not an easy task. And I can't say we'll be able to achieve the same next year.
Indeed, and we're talking about stark and challenging that public health is 141st out of 153 local authorities. That is distinctly worrying. We know that prevention through public health is incredibly important to the sustainability of this council, and that work jointly with the NHS is absolutely crucial for us, opportunity for us to be able to make the council sustainable in the long term. So yeah, that is a distinct risk, having that shortage of funding into this key area. Anything else, Trudy? Did you want to add anything? No, you're absolutely happy with that. So we're moving on to community services and Fed.
Thanks, Bill. So in community services, we're currently projecting no projected variance, which is positive for us overall. I do think that we do have some risks to highlight. I think there's risks across the board, I think, to lots of services at the moment in relation to the new finance system coming in, and the fact that we are basing our projecting on the kind of knowns rather than the unknowns, so where we don't know our complete expenditure. So I think that there is just a wider point there for all of us, that is a challenge, and that could move as the months come on. But I know that the finance team and the directors have got that in hand. In relation to the community services area, I think our biggest risk and the volatility is around our housing and our homelessness provision. So we are seeing increased numbers of people presenting to us due to the cost of living crisis. we're all talking about costs going up, but when we do have to put people in temporary accommodation, that does cost us more. And there are less houses available for people, and therefore they're in that provision for longer. We do receive grants, but those grants aren't necessarily completely covering those costs if we see those costs rise. So I do think that that is just an area to highlight today.
Okay, thank you. Which brings us on to highways. Good morning, Mike.
Morning, Bill. Thank you, Chair. Highways is forecasting an overspend of £1.1 million this year. That's down to a greater amount of safety defect repair work than we were anticipating. We had a particularly tough winter. The government recognised that and did provide us with some extra funding, but as ever with these things, it's never enough. So despite that extra funding, we think we're still going to be by year end at slightly over £1 million over on highways maintenance. I'm pleased that, having spent much of the last couple of weeks in Devon, that our roads are in considerably better condition than Devon's, and it didn't used to be that way. It was very much the reverse for a long period of time, and now we are, in my view, very much better off than Devon in terms of the condition of the roads. The recent CQC report, that's not the Care Quality Commission, it's something completely different that I've forgotten. It is a report that works out exactly what the state of play is with our assets. And it suggests that we've done a pretty good job with the money that we've got. We don't put in as much money. We haven't historically here as some counties, but what we do put into it is well used, and we have a very high, as a result of that, a very high repudiation rate for insurance claims, because we do what we say we're going to do in terms of making sure that those repairs are done when they're supposed to be done. In terms of what we'll do, we've got some actions in the MTFS, but we're confident that within the overall Directorate of Place and Climate that we can recover that spend rather than it coming out of highways on its own. There's a much smaller overspend predicted within IPG of £200,000, and as the report states, that's to do with difficulties with regard to allocating salary costs to capital schemes, but we're doing some more work on that with Jason and his team to see what more we can capitalise over and above what we're currently doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rigby. Mickey, I don't know whether you wanted to add on highways. Okay. Just realised we've missed out climate, environment, sustainability because Dixie's not here, and that's slipped me by. I noticed an overspend there. Mickey, are you able to just to update on that? It was one of those figures that slightly surprised me when reading this report.
Absolutely. So there's an £800,000 overspend forecast in Councillor Dixie Dark's area at the end of month 4. The overspend and the change in it is entirely due to waste services. So the forecast overspend has reduced by about 2.6 million as we've reviewed the risk in relation to the commercial dialogue we're having with Suez, our collection contractor, a kind of a commercially sensitive issue we've talked to the Waste Board previously about. The remaining overspend is built up from a couple of areas, so tonnages and collection costs. So the things that happen, like the King's coronation, extra bank holiday, that cost us about £100,000 in terms of, it means that our staff are working on a weekend that we didn't forecast. Interim measures we've had to put in place due to last minute changes in legislation from government on stuff like persistent organic pollutants. You might see different containers at recycling centres. That has a cost impact on us, and a small amount in relation to the costs of preventing strike action over the summer, something we shared the costs of 50-50 with Suez, and which clearly avoided considerable disruption and cost if they had gone ahead.
Thank you. Who'd have thought that the King's coronation would cause 100,000 extra spend on that? It's one of those fascinating little tweaks that there are perhaps unexpected that lead to it. Let's hope we don't have lots of coronations in the years to come. Long live the King, indeed. We've got partnerships and localities and workforce and transformation, which is under Theo. Yep.
I think we've missed.
Oh, have I missed someone?
Economy, employment and planning.
Oh, I'm sorry. I've skipped Ros. How dare I?
Absolutely.
I will live to regret that for the rest of the day.
Don't worry. Just very quickly, within economy, employment and planning, there is a one-off pressure. Unbelievably, a very late change in the funding requirements from DWP, and it means that we have a one-off pressure of 400,000. However, we're looking within the budget to try and mitigate it in wherever we can. But at this moment in time, I have to declare that.
Sorry, Theo, to make you jump slightly too early.
Thank you. I was slightly surprised because I was expecting you to call on Ros, not me. But the partnership in localities, strategy, performance and workforce service areas are not predicting any overspends this year. Work is ongoing within them on areas such as the review of third sector grants and the other elements within the 17 points of the MTFP, the workforce work and the transformation work. Local community networks remain a key way where we hope that we will be able to develop partnership working with city, town and parish councils and other partners to deliver what we need to in different and more cost-effective ways. The transformation and change programme obviously is ongoing with work being done. The scope of the transition programme is going to be reviewed later this month with executive and service directors focusing on developing, consulting and implementing management staff structures and securing the management staff capacity for our council.
Okay, anything to add, Alan, on that one? Strategy, performance and governance, I see is my responsibility, which I understand there's a small overspend forecast on our need for extra legal costs, particularly with children's, that we're having to externalise some of those costs due to recruitment issues. We're obviously hoping to fill those vacancies internally, or at least to bring this in-house in some way and reduce those costs going forwards. Finance and procurement, Liz.
Thank you, Chair. There are overspends there that are about resourcing, particularly human resourcing. They're not huge, but they're all areas where we need to be working. And as the transformational work gets underway, which of course is with the workforce too, as well as with Alan Jones' entire directorate, that will become clearer as the months go by and our monitoring reports improve in both in detail and hopefully in figures too. Thank you.
And back to Ros on property services and strategic assets.
Thank you. There are actually two budgets within this area. There's one on the strategic asset management. And we've already mentioned earlier this meeting a number of the significant unbudgeted expenditures, the 80,000 and probably more than that for structural services as the emerging RAC issue. We have shortfalls in income, and I particularly note the Saltlands Solar Park, where we were expecting revenue, but it's now very well documented that the grid capacity in this region means that we can no longer expect to have that connection to the grid and the income and for some years now. But it was unfortunately built into this year's budget, some revenue there. We're also have the costs of holding some properties which we are due to sell, but we're delayed for receiving planning permission on these properties because of the phosphate issue. And then one other thing which is going to put pressure in here, and that is the additional security costs around the old Bridgewater Hospital site, which we unfortunately can't put against the levelling up bid. However, we do anticipate we will get some savings out of staff budgets because we're carrying a number of vacancies. And so difficult at this stage because, as Federica indicated, getting down underneath some of the detail within the budget is still, we're waiting on the development. And the one thing I would say finally, which is again a pressure in this area, is that the officers, as people know, have a budget for utility costs, and there is buying forward of this, both gas and electricity. However, it is very difficult, given our consolidated unitary estate, to get to have really good, accurate forecasting. So while we think we're under control on this, it is still subject to a degree of waiting to see exactly what the new estate is going to make in demand of utilities. On the second budget, which is the one for commercial investments, it's obviously a difficult time in terms of the market generally. We still have some vacancies at Northgate Yard in Bridgewater, and we have a vacancy in one of the development sites in Taunton too. But overall, the portfolio is holding up in terms of income. We cannot be totally confident in terms of year end. As you know, we have the freehold and the tenant of Wilko in Yeovil, and we also have some leases also being renegotiated as the high street is going through transition. So we shall see where we come at year end. I cannot be as confident in the year end forecast as I would like to be.
Thank you, Councillor White. Former Sedgemoor members will remember me speaking on my colleagues on Northgate Yard on a number of occasions. I do hope that project manages to find a more lucrative way forwards, though your report is not a surprise on that one. ICT and Communications Technology, Councillor Rigby again.
Thank you, Chair. We have a small projected overspend of £100,000 within ICT, which I'm reasonably pleased about. That doesn't sound a bit odd, in as much as with all of the work that's been going on, particularly to implement MSD over the last year and continuing to be invested, that's pretty small. So we've put in place the beginnings of a large enterprise resource planning tool that is not gone massively over budget, certainly not by 80. Is that working better? Yeah, it's back on again now. So it's a pretty decent position to be in. The £100,000 overspend is as a result of the Office 365 backup costs being slightly higher than we'd anticipated. We're working to find a way to bring that back down to get it within the envelope that we'd originally planned. We've also not been able to make the data centre consolidations as quickly as we might have wanted to. We'd have liked to have done that this financial year. It's more likely to be the next financial year. So the saving will come on that, just not this year. And that's where we are with the £100,000 projected overspend in ICT. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I think, thank goodness we're not Birmingham line is being trotted out again. We do appreciate, our sympathies with colleagues in Birmingham with the situation that they're in, but certainly a huge cost pressure from their transition to the Oracle system. And a couple more updates from Liz, if I may, the non-service pay award and contingencies.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If I may, there is a favourable movement in the special grants under Rural Services Delivery Grant being a little bit higher. And the other two things to mention are actually tied between the table on page 215 and also the corporate contingency on 216. because the pay award is still not agreed as a national bargaining pay award is still not agreed. But the contingency, the corporate contingency of £6 million is taken as committed, and part of that commitment is about any pay award that exceeds the 5% that is in the budget for 23-24. Is there anything you need to add to that, Jason? Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, colleagues, for taking us through the current situation. Stark and challenging, but we need to be up to that challenge. And I think some of the advice that we've had from SIPFA, particularly important in recognising that the whole council needs to have this focus on resolving those problems, making sure that we still take care of those most in need, but also make absolutely the most of every opportunity that's coming Somerset's way. Those opportunities of being a unitary council, of working with an NHS with the same footprint, of that inward investment, particularly at the gravity site that's coming into our council. We do have good news stories to tell in Somerset, even though these are challenging times, and we need to make the most of those opportunities while still taking care of those most in need. Okay, just opening up to the room. Oh, so I'm sorry, I didn't ask for any further questions from lead members or associate lead members first, which would be my usual modus operandi. Councillor Wakefield, Sarah, could you come in first? And then I see Mandy is creeping towards the table. Oh, I've got fed as well. So I'm so sorry, Mandy. I've caused you to move by getting ahead of myself in the chair's schedule. Sit comfortably, please. Sarah.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, we've heard about the inflation costs. We've heard about budget variances. We've heard about the cost of statutory services, in particularly in adult and child care. We've also heard about a few underspends, which I think we need a few more underspends, actually. And we've heard about the close monitoring that we're doing. What I want to ask is, what reassurance can we have as an administration and indeed the public that we're not going to be the next Slough, Birmingham, Croydon, Thurrock, or indeed any of the others that have gone? And are we going to be in that list of councils somewhere, but not at the top? I mean, where are we going to be? Because if we don't make the savings and the government doesn't give us any more money, which they're not showing any signs of doing, we are teetering on the edge of this situation, this budget gap that we can't close. So I know we're going to make savings. I know we've got the 17 points which we're looking at, but I just want to know what we can say about that, because I know people will be very worried about it, particularly after what's happened in Birmingham. Thank you.
I'm looking to the chief executive, the director, finance officer, the league member. I'm not sure who wants to take the first bite of that cherry. Liz, go for it.
I'll have a first go, Chair. Just to say, having seen the combined reserves from the 5 councils and therefore the opening position for Somerset Council, I do believe that we have both some time on our side and also those opportunities that you have referred to in wider Somerset and through the transformation activity that we are going through for this council. Our issue is that we must take short-term decisions, demonstrate fiscal responsibility while we keep our eye on the medium term. And it is achieving that balance that will either enable us to succeed or not. And I think it is very clear what we have to do. I don't think there is any confusion at all. It is absolutely clear. We also need, Chair, I think this is really important, to thank the people of this council, the staff. They are delivering business as usual. They are working through transformation, and there will be changes in employment. And we know that when everybody came through to the payroll, they went into a particular place to make sure they were in the payroll, got paid, could book holiday, and there will be some movements. And at the same time, we are asking managers to find savings. We are asking a great deal of our officers, and we need to give them assurance that we have got our eye on this, both on the short term, on the need for fiscal responsibility, and on the medium term, where we will not lose sight of opportunities for Somerset and Somerset Council. Thank you.
Yeah, just to sort of give a comment in terms of that, the work we've done now gives us our opening position, as you raised earlier. Our total reserves, £154.7 million. That is better than what I was projecting a month or so ago. So slightly better, but if we did nothing, absolutely nothing, and all the figures stayed as they were, so we overspent by £26.1 million. We did absolutely nothing to address next year's budget gap. By the time you get to 25-26, I'd be telling you you're running out of money. So you're not in the immediate problem area that I know some authorities are, but a bit like we said earlier, we can see the problem ahead. We can't be in the position where we don't take any action to address those things.
Just very briefly, thank you, Chair, to answer Councillor Wakefield's point about the wider system. The wider system is in trouble. At this point in time, council's ability to increase their income is capped by government. However, our costs are not capped, and our costs are going up faster than our income, as Mr. Vaughan highlighted earlier. So if you roll forward an indefinite period of time, every single council in the country will eventually have to issue a Section 114 and go bust effectively. The difference will be, where do you start out with your reserves, and what do you do in that indefinite period of time to stop yourself sitting in that position? So the fact we're highlighting this early, we're highlighting this now, gives us the opportunity to lay some quality plans that hopefully can protect local people as best we can. It won't be entirely, I'm sure, but what we need to do is make sure we take the time we can generate through those plans to do as much as we can to stop that point coming. But if you don't do anything, as Mr. Vaughan just said, everyone over a period of time will go bust. The thing that will determine when you go bust in that list is what's the level of reserve you start with and how much activity you take between the end point and the beginning. The beginning point and the end point.
Thank you, Jason, Liz, and Duncan for those responses. Satisfied? Thank you. Fed.
Thanks, Bill. I think my question and maybe comment arises slightly following on from what Duncan and Jason have said, is what is the figure, do you know roughly, of what we've seen in cuts from central government to local government funding? I thought it was around 40% over the last 10 years. Is that an accurate figure? Because I think it is clear that we need to demonstrate to the public just about the fact that our income doesn't match the expenditure, but their need for services is not just wanting about staying the same, it's actually increasing because of demand. And then I find it really useful, and I guess this is the second part of my question or point, I find it really useful in the simplification that you gave, Jason, and also there's a figure that Claire gave around that income versus expenditure. So when people believe, who don't sit in this room, who don't follow local government closely, that we charge them council tax and that council tax basically covers the services that they want. That isn't true, but that is what they believe because they pay us a significant amount of money per year for the services, whether that's, £1,000 a year or more. To them, that is a lot of money and it's ever increasing. And we constantly put up council tax, but the services roughly stay the same, or we're actually that's a challenge for us to even present them in such a way. So I think there is something for us and local government in general and for us to demonstrate. I think you said that even if council tax went up, it would be 3.7% that we would get in. That is a significant amount of money, but the pay that we give our staff that I rightly support would actually be 5%. So it's never going to match. So it's how we communicate that to the general public, to everyone who doesn't sit in this room, that doesn't follow local government, that doesn't read local government papers, that this is happening. And again, I think there's something for our services to be able to do that. So Claire, you said, I think we've got one student that we statutorily have to provide transport to within the SEND sector, and that costs us £40,000 a year. totally believe that we should be providing that support to them, but the general public need to understand that those are the costs that we experience. So I guess it's how we present that to them. And I guess my question is how can we do that? And also for you, Jason, am I right that national government are literally stripping us bare from the funding that they give us?
I think you raise a really important point about how we communicate this to the public. Local government budgets are really complex, the type of business they are, but actually when you get down to it, it's actually very basic. It's no different to our own household budget. The picture I painted earlier, it's what most households have faced. Actually, your costs have gone up and your income stayed the same or not gone up by enough. That message we do need to get over to the public, because you're right, I think most people don't understand it. They believe council tax funds everything. It doesn't. It funds a large proportion of our spend, but it certainly doesn't cover everything. So I think there's a real sort of educational piece we need to do to the communities in its widest sense, just explaining some of the myths around our funding. Your other question about sort of national funding, there is no doubt, and most probably can send you some stuff from the LGA around, there has been significant cuts to local government funding. We saw that from 2010 to 2015-16 in particular, massive changes where local government total spend actually reduced, not just by inflation, but in actual cash grants. So I can dig those out. I haven't got off the top of my head. I think that 40% you talked about is the sort of figure the LGA quotes, but I'd need to dig up the actual precise figures.
Councillor Ruddle.
Thank you, Chairman. Jason, what position do you think we would be in if we hadn't froze council tax for 6 years?
From memory, I think Liz has got the figure, so she might mind. Yeah, in terms of the base, so our actual annual budget year on year would be about £24 million better off. Obviously, you've had a number of years where we didn't receive that. So in total cash terms, you'd add up those 24s over that 5-6 year period, and you'd get sort of towards the 150 million-ish.
So we wouldn't be having these conversations now, would we? Sorry.
I think we'd just be in a different position in the queue, which is perhaps a lesson to learn. Right, I think that's all executive and associate lead members. So I'm just going around the room and I'll go to Mandy first.
Thank you. I'm pleased you've come to me because I think we're about to go into the rabbit hole that CIPFA warned us not to do in going back and looking historically. We've got a budget, we have a challenge, it's looking forwards. That was CIPFA advice, not mine. So we talked earlier about the analogy of the iceberg on the horizon. There might be an iceberg on the horizon, but I think our boat is heading very quickly towards it. And as we all know, it takes a long time to turn it and take action. And I think our 151 officers just said 18 months, which isn't a long time in terms of council tax and getting some of these projects initiated and making savings. So firstly, I did attend scrutiny and ask questions on the 8th. And you did task scrutiny with looking at the budget. I am disappointed the scrutiny comments aren't here within this paper because I think it was a useful debate and I think would help inform you all. So I hope those will still come through a future paper. So a couple of the points I've raised here, I raised at scrutiny. So we've heard the challenges, really great. I appreciate absolutely the monthly updates and I'm glad that that's continuing. I think for every councillor, it's incumbent upon every councillor in this council to get on top of the budget and understand where we are. So I'm very appreciative of that. And I note within the report, we've got 17 key areas from which you are hoping to do some work to make some savings. There are no amounts, there are no dates. It's really difficult to track against how you are doing within that action plan and how far along that line you are. So my plea is, I suppose, moving forward, as with all savings, write down what they are, understand where the savings are going to be made and let everybody know how you're doing. I think that would be really helpful in monitoring terms. So that's my first question, can that be done? My second question was around, I think a couple of people have raised, we didn't know, we weren't expecting the rises that we were having. So my first question is, it's handy having the two papers. When I look at adults, social care last year, we've had it in our paper, that closed at 176.1 million. And this year the budget was 185.5 million, which is 5%. We've never had, if you look at all the previous years, we've gone up a lot more than 5% every year in demand and costs. So I would ask, will that be considered when moving forward to future budgets? And if we look at children's, it's even more stark. Children's closed at 128.3 million. And this year's budget was 123.1 million. So your budget for this year for children's was 4% less than you ended at last year. And I think I raised this right back at budget setting. You've got to look at year-end position when sort of budgeting forward. So my question is, will that be done with the budgets this year? And my last question, I might need a written response, is what percentage of usable reserves, and I know some are in earmarked and some are not, have been used up when we talk about last year's outturn, the 20 million, and add that to the current 28.6 million. So what percentage over the outturn last year and the current position, which is predicting the year end, of our usable reserves have been used? And I think that's relevant because that absolutely links into the sustainability and resilience of the council. Happy to have a written response if that helps.
If I may, Chair, just on the usable reserves, I think that work on the complete review of the reserves is a really important piece to do, and I don't think that the answer, that is a really important answer, is possible until that work is finished. On children's and on adults, I think we have a new reality now. None of us know how inflation will continue. My personal view is that when you hear a sentence that includes homes for children and private equity in the same sentence, for me, if I have heard one thing in my 6 years as a councillor that makes me realise that something is broken, it is that. It absolutely should not be private equity making money out of placements for children who most need support. To be honest, I would say that's heartbreaking, really, to hear that. And the stark and challenging in the introduction to this paper, I think stark and challenging and totally unacceptable should be added into this paper to private equity making money out of children's places. So how we can work better in that way absolutely without returning to some of the ways children were looked after in the past that we all acknowledge and would never want to go there again. But I think that is a really important job for children. I think what we'll bring to that is that understanding and also that greater reality of, we were hoping, weren't we? I think we all lived in hope that the war in Ukraine would not last too long. We were hoping, weren't we, that interest rates would come down again. And in fact, you know, there were plenty of people nationally talking about interest rates reducing again. Personally, I do think they're too high. That is not now the government's task to do that. So I think there will be a greater reality as we go forward to set the budget for next year. And on the monitoring of savings, I don't know, Jason, if you want to add anything there. You're right. And what we have to look at is where savings are being achieved and not achieved in the current year, because that is compounded then in future years. So they're all really good questions. I think some are things where we'll act on them sooner and some where we need to allow officers to do their good work before we can come back to you.
Yeah, if I can just add to that. So on the individual savings within services, we monitor that through particularly the quarterly updates. We'll track that 40.9 million as you've seen in this report. In terms of the actions individual services are taking, that will feed through the monthly report. Coming on then to the 17 key areas, we will track those. They're all slightly different in their nature, so it's quite hard to put pounds against them because some of them aren't pounds. So if you take the very last one, financial resilience and sustainability review, that won't save us any money, but it will inform us of some of the questions you're actually asking about reserves and things like that. So they're a bit of a mixture, but we will be doing monthly monitoring of those and reporting those. So particularly, that's an area that the scrutiny committee want to look at. I think one of the practical issues we've got that we raised at the last scrutiny committee is the timing of scrutiny in this committee. We need scrutiny before, not after. So scrutiny is tomorrow. Not, it should have been yesterday, as it were. So that's something we're just trying to sort out with Democratic Service colleagues so that that flows better and the comments from scrutiny then flow into here in an appropriate manner.
Okay, thank you, Mandy. So now just going around the room for hands I've seen up. Councillor Wilkins first. Good morning, Richard.
Morning, thank you, Chair. Jason, using your analogy of the iceberg and the 114 iceberg, have you actually, you've given us fair warning as much as you can about its position, but have you actually detected any change of direction to avoid this iceberg, or is it too early, or is the iceberg, does it have too many outside powers, should I say? That is my first question. My second question is in regard to the risk of cutting services. Has the risk, for instance, with the school repairs, the government's had a real issue where they've underfunded school repairs, and it comes back to bite you in the long term. Obviously we have to avoid the iceberg, but has an assessment been made on the cutting that we will have to take as to the medium to long term issues that this will bring up? Thank you.
If I could just start, Chair, by talking about the MTFP board and the work that that board will be doing. So last year we had the budget working group. Last year that was pulling chief executives, 151 officers and lead members from across all 5 councils. We now have what still appears to be a very full room, but of people who are working obviously now from one set of spreadsheets, one budget. So that work has started. We've had the first 2 meetings already. That board is not a decision-making board, but it will enable us to consider some of the decisions that will be taken by executive. So you will see those decisions starting to come forward from October executive onwards. I think the reserves position of the 5 combined councils, it might make the iceberg look a little bit further away for a while, but that is not good enough, and that is no excuse for us. We absolutely know that there may be a slightly greater amount of reserves, general fund and earmarked, but this council has a great deal more in the way of responsibility now with all of the services for all of Somerset. I don't know that this applies so much with schools, but for anything where savings are to be made, an equality impact assessment has to be done. There are areas where public consultation is necessary, and also consultation with the business world of Somerset. So there are lots of things that will be happening, and if anybody thinks that it will get easier as the financial year goes on, they're wrong. Thank you.
If I can just add to that, I think we're obviously a new council. We've only been here 6 months, as it were. We sometimes forget that. I was just looking at the budget monitoring report in front of us, actually on page 188, and just picking on adults, going to be the page I was on. We're already seeing in terms of the mitigations and things that are happening there, the actions that are being taken. So I think, are things happening? Yes, absolutely. I think all the directors are very aware of the challenges we face. I think all the executive members are very aware of the challenges we face. It's not easy. This is not easy. We're doing this on the back of, we talked earlier, of 10 years of austerity. There is no simple solutions to any of this. It's a combination of doing lots of difficult things. Coming on to your sort of talk about the repairs and things like that, absolutely. You can make some very easy, quick financial savings by cutting out the repairs. And some of the council's equivalent of that is some of our prevention services, actually. And that's one of the real dangers. You'll see this in Birmingham and other councils, is they are not statutory services. So they have immediately stopped. Expenditure on those services has stopped in Birmingham. Today, they've stopped. They're not happening. It's illegal to spend money on them. Actually, the longer term impact, whether that be 2 years, 5 years or 10 years, is not very sensible. It's a bit like your repairs analogy. It's kind of not fixing the roof today and sticking a bucket underneath it, and then 5 years time wondering why you need to put on a new roof. One would cost you a little money, and in 5 years time cost you a lot. But that's the challenges every council up and down this country is really facing now. It's a real challenge. So some of the things we need to do, when you just look at the numbers, and I talked about the increase in funding for next year, doesn't match our costs. We've either got to stop doing things or do them differently. That may not be the council doing them, maybe some other ways of doing them, or using technology to reduce down the cost of doing them. That is the challenge we face, not an easy challenge.
Councillor White, do you want to add to the response for Councillor Wilkins?
Please, just put something in perspective. In 2011-12, the government used to give the county 10 million a year for school maintenance. In this current year, it's now down to 2 million. That is a significant cumulative impact. During the last 3 years, for instance, this council has invested 18 million over and above what the government has been giving us to address critical building maintenance within the school estate. The latest estimate of the backlog of repairs, high priority repairs, that's not replacing buildings which have come to their end or anything like that, because we bid for capital money separately for that. This is ongoing preventative repairs, and it's about 40 million. And that 40 million, again, is going to have to become, if you divide it 2 million a year, which is what we're getting from the government, would be long gone before we meet the ever increasing needs. So as a council, we've got this awful dilemma all the time of recognising right across the board in every area that we need to do things, preventative things, to prevent things happening in the future. But with the significant reduction in local government income, we're not in a position, and this is the point I think our chief exec made some time ago, which is that the system is basically broke. We cannot do what we need to do, which any sensible landlord would do, because we just don't have the money.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions, Councillor Wilkins.
Thank you very much, Chair. Appreciate it.
We've got Councillor Redmond and Councillor Henley in the room, then Councillor Osborne online.
Chair, thank you. Some of the points that I was going to make have been made, but just to cover the bits that I want to. First of all, thank you and your colleagues for the detailed report. It's good that we're catching up on our budget monitoring and we're able to observe it in a better perspective. A couple of points that I think Councillor Lechon made a valid point, but I was going to make it, and I think it's important that we try to be careful with our messaging where we go with this, only in as far as Councillor Lechon made reference to the cost of unregistered and other placements that are made. I think it was and I'll stand to be corrected, I think it was the Children's Commissioner that actually said that it's wrong for businesses to benefit from young people's neglect and abuse. We forget very often the fact that a very large percentage of our young people are there for those reasons, and that's the bit that's important. The reason I raised that is because we need to be careful with the messaging. It's important. I know the Fed made reference earlier to transport costs for one of our young people. We need to take it away from individuals. It's valid that a young person is there, but we need to be very careful that and I'm not criticising the fact that she made that. I use that as an example because it was brought up here. When we look at, for example, Homes and Horizons, it's an amazing project and something that this council should be applauded for, but we need to be careful how many of our flags we're sticking to that, because let it progress in a sensible way rather than try and overload it. It's good that it's saving us money and it's already showing benefits now, and we need to be clear on where we go with that. Just a final 2 points, Chair, if I could. It's in relation to the monthly updates. I welcome that as a member, and I welcome but we need to be making clear to all of our colleagues the fact that it's important they understand the monthly monitoring and the potential for the next year's MTFP, because we've been doing a lot of work on that, and I welcome that the council has put in place a number of training packages that will bring the members along, but we got to make sure that those members are in the room to be brought along with us. So I'll ask that we can make sure that message is passed out. And just one final point, you've both yourself and Councillor Leyshon have received a note from the scrutiny manager in relation to some clarity question around the fact that you're asking the executive, the scrutiny committees to look at their budget areas. It's important. One of the things that, as chair of Children and Families last year, we looked at it. We identified 2 areas which were overspending. We did a task and finish group in relation to both of those and fed that information back. And that's still, the chances are they're likely to be the areas again. So it's the question that scrutiny chairs are asking. Is there a bit of clarity over how you want us to look at it? Is there, for example, I know it's very coarse, but I don't want to say, yes, we've looked at it, let's move on, or yes, but we need some more information about what your expectation is, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Lee, for those questions. I think Councillor Munt is nodding at me.
I just wanted to make one observation, and that is that, in my understanding, parents, carers and young people have absolutely no idea of the cost of a school placement nor of the transport bill that is attached to that. Now, clearly they might make inquiries and they might have some notion, but actually they don't know. So anyone who's being charged £40,000 for transport will have absolutely no clue that it is them or their child or their family who is impacted by that. That's for us. But I do think it's really important that colleagues understand the sort of, I don't like using the word market, but that's in which we have to operate. And it's tough. Thank you, Lee.
Just a quick point, Chair, sorry, in relation to that. I get that. The problem is, it's a horrible world out there. The media can take and move things. My point is, we need to be very clear that if it's 1 or 2 young people that are causing us a large increase, that's not their fault. And I'm not saying that we're saying that, and I'm not criticising. Please be, I'm not criticising the fact, but we need to be very careful in how we message that, because 80% of the people that we give that message to will understand and accept it, but then you get the ones that it's a normal thing. I'm just asking us to be careful with our messaging. That's all.
Yeah, thank you. The comms challenge of what is our highly visible services. You know, residents, you can see the pothole in the road. And you can see it being repaired or not repaired, as the case may be. Those services that aren't as visible, such as the transport bill for one young individual going to school, aren't visible. And in terms of getting that message across, it's a complicated one. And it does require, you're absolutely right, a nuance of messaging that we need to be very clear on. Just want to hand the scrutiny question over to Councillor Leyshon, if I may.
Thank you, Chair. I know as a new councillor, I learnt more at scrutiny than anywhere else, and actually I recommend it to the many new councillors that we have here. And we do, of course, now have 5 scrutiny committees. But I just wanted to make the point that it's kind of a 2-way bridge, between executive and scrutiny. So it's a way of members learning and being informed in a formal but very educative and useful environment. And it's also the way that suggestions come back to executive, both on the day and also fed back to these meetings. So I completely take on point the fact that when the schedule was put together for scrutiny meetings, that it was kind of a first run at it this year. And we do appreciate that there are improvements that can be made. But I do, and I always will, recommend scrutiny to every member. And I absolutely am sure that all my colleagues on the executive will attend the relevant scrutiny meetings and more, as much as they are able to, because it's where we all learn. Thank you.
And a huge advantage that they're now accessible online, which wasn't something that we had. You know, I do appreciate being able to listen in on scrutiny meetings from a distance. Sometimes when I'm engaged in other work, but it does help to be able to access them in that way. And the work of all scrutiny chairs is hugely valued. And I look forward to your input in helping us to avoid the iceberg. I'm not sure whether we want to stretch the metaphor of icebergs too much. So thank you for your questions, Lee. Councillor Henley.
Thank you very much, Chair, fellow councillors and those watching outside and those in the room and not. I really enjoyed the Titanic, the iceberg analogies, having spent a wonderful 2 weeks ago working in Belfast, delivering mental health courses face to face and visited the Titanic Museum. I wanted to say, really, look at the number of local councils. I think history is important, and I think it guides us and our lessons that can be learned from it. I don't agree that it's something we should just park and forget about. The fact that this one of the biggest predecessor local authority that has come together to form the Somerset Council, starved itself of in a range of £150 million is indeed really relevant. And I think when you look at what's going on nationally, we've seen Birmingham, the biggest local authority in Europe, which has fallen over the edge of the cliff. We've seen Woking, we've seen Northamptonshire beforehand, we've seen Thurrock. Who's going to be next? Thankfully, it's not going to be us. But there is extreme challenges there, and I appreciate all the work and support of the work that Councillor Leishon, executive members and officers are doing, and managing this very, very challenging situation and trying to steer this council into the best possible financial situation that is. But I think we need to face the facts that local government finance as a whole is broken. It is absolutely broken. This model cannot continue as it is for many more years. We've heard about the problems that face us in 25, 26. How many more local authorities have to fall over before central government actually takes positive, proactive action? And I was interested today, as the former vice chair of the County Councils Network, to see the current incumbent of the chair of the County Councils Network saying today that this is a situation which cannot continue and that we need positive action from the government this autumn. It has to come. Government has made decisions in the past and has found the magic money tree. I think, we cannot continue like this nationally, trying to manage down a decline in local government right across the local government family. Something needs to happen. I believe that austerity was a political decision. It was funded and withdrawn council funding for authorities like Somerset between 40 and 60% over the last 13 years. Something has to happen. And I know that we are working with CIPFA. We know we're working with our colleagues across other councils in the County Councils Network and lobbying. But local government funding is broken. And unless government takes urgent action, this is going to continue and many more councils are going to fall off the edge of the financial cliff.
I didn't detect a question. I detected lots of nodding. I'm not expecting a response to that, but I think there's a great deal that we can disagree with, and it underlines the phrase that we're in a stark and challenging position. And so, yeah, I appreciate the Titanic analogy going on. A distant relative of mine was one of the lead investigators on the Wreck Commission, of that, and it is important to understand why we're in the situations because of the past. I'm a history teacher, of course I'm saying that, but of course we're in the position of where we are. We need to plan for the future based on that understanding of the past as well. Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Chairman. It's certainly very clear that you're going to have to be making some very tough, hard decisions going forward. And that was certainly a message coming from the CIFA Chief Executive at the presentation that I actually saw online. So good luck with that. I'd like to thank Dean for his brief update on transformation and savings and where adult social care is. The My Life, My Future programme, I'm looking forward to the briefing on that later this month, and that is going to generate a 10 million saving. Admittedly, some of that is now delayed from this financial year to the next financial year. But what is plan B if those savings don't come forward in the timescale that you want, or perhaps don't come forward at all? That's my first question. You're talking about doing this through high needs review, joint funding of high cost placements, and some of the issues that I think Lee Redman alluded to are very similar for adults. So what is the risk that you may see where families disagree with your assessments? What is the increased risk of JRs and possible complaints to Ombudsman, and how will that be dealt with? And finally, how are you going to report on the progress of the Newton work? I think we'd all agree that 7 million is a significant investment. I know that work is now ongoing. How is that going to be reported back in terms of its achievements? And how often? Thank you.
Okay, I'll thank you very much for your questions and for your wishes of good luck. They are warmly appreciated, of course. Mel, do you want to pick up that one?
Yeah, of course I will. Can I guarantee we'll make the 10 million? I damn well hope so, because that's what we've tried to do as part of it. And we haven't just picked that number out of the air. Let's be honest, we've done an awful lot of work across us with our finance team, with our performance team, to understand what that looks like. And as we discussed earlier today, we're taking the PID to you. You'll have a look at it. You'll be able to see that. You'll be able to see where that comes. In terms of monitoring against that, there is a clear governance process for us. It was set out as part of the papers that came here. We will be taking that to scrutiny. We can take it to execs if and when needed. We will report in that to the Transformation, Transition and Change Board. It will also be reported across to the ICB. So there is clear process and governance around this. It'll obviously be governed within adult social care as well. So that's the part of the governance on that. There is always a challenge for us, and what you heard from Dean was some of the things that we are mitigations that we're putting in place this year, as we do every year, to manage the budget as it is. So the things you heard around earlier on were things that we do year on year to try and make sure that we manage our budget appropriately. I'm hoping that we can reduce some of the spending that budget, but as Dean pointed out, there is a challenge for us dependent on what winter looks like this year. So we will continue to monitor that. We have clear plans, we have clear governance over our budget, and we'll continue to do that. In line with, as you heard from CIPFA the other day, most of the, well, I would say everything that they discussed in that, we have already done and have already in place. But I'm more than happy to talk to you again offline if you need any additional information.
Yes, thank you for that, Mel. That's very helpful. I think the risk also is, well, we don't know what winter's going to bring, and it seems very strange to be talking about winter and the risks of what a hard winter will have on our own budgets when we're sitting in the middle of a heat wave. But I think
it sounds quite correctly as to exactly what we should be doing, is preparing and planning for the future. I ought to have perhaps added that you wished us good luck, but it's going to be hard work and effort that gets us through this, not luck. To be fair, Councillor Slocum, you had your hand up, you had your hand down, and now you've appeared on my screen. I'm not sure what's happening. Have you got a question for us?
Not so much, well, sort of a question. I'm so sorry. I've got a bit of trouble with my computer, which is being changed next week. So I apologise. It's just playing me up. What I wanted to say was, obviously, as chair of Adult Social Care and Health, it's a real dilemma about the budgets, because I know we have all got to work together. You're absolutely right. And I think what Mel answered a few moments ago reassured me, as she always does. And I think it will be about us making sure we give the best service. But I'm always nervous when we have to look at budgets and reduce budgets, because members of the public are obviously shouting all the time about surgeries, about no dentistry, da-di-da-di-da, it goes on and on and on. So it is a little bit of a worry, but I do think as collectively, it is about us working together and making sure that we find the best way forward. So apologies, because Mel had answered a lot of what I wanted to ask. So thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity, Chair.
Thank you, Jill. Sorry that you're nervous, but we absolutely got it covered that we need.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to sound nervous. I apologise.
Well, you said you were nervous, so I just wanted to make sure that you were feeling reassured now. It is absolutely essential that we work collaboratively through the Integrated Care Partnership with our friends in the NHS to be able to deliver the coordinated and integrated health and social care that our residents deserve. And thank you for your support on that. Okay.
Thank you.
There being no other hands or questions, I think it's time to move on to the recommendations on item 7. The recommendations being to note the forecast overspend at month 4, to request the scrutiny committees to do their urgent review, to approve the member briefings, and to provide a monthly update on the financial positions and actions being taken to address it. Do I have a proposer from Councillor Leyshon? Do I have a seconder from Councillor Ruddle? Can I see those executive lead members in favour, please? And those against? That is clearly carried. Thank you. And we move on to item 8 in our agenda, which is the Q1 performance report. First of all, hand over to Councillor Liz Leyshon, and then I believe to Sarah Cretney, who I'd like to welcome as our new Service Director for Strategy and Performance.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep this really brief. As lead member for Resources and Performance, I'm really delighted that we're welcoming Sarah Cretney to us. Moving to Somerset from Devon County Council, and I know that Sarah's going to be in a really good position working in the directorate led by Alan Jones, and with colleagues who, some of whom are online, some of whom are in the room. So Tony Johnson and Julie Jackson are in the room with us, and I think Nicola is online. I'm not sure how many other people there will be in your team, but I do know of their great combination of diligent and creative work will stand you in good stead, and that in turn will stand this council in good stead. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. So just to introduce the report that you've got in front of you, which is the Q1 performance report. To start with, the importance that we have this information in front of us and that we have that regularly is making sure that we understand the impact that we're having as a council. So we've had lots of conversation today about our budget situation, so how we understand the impact of the investments that we're making and understand how to make decisions on those investments for the future regarding the impact, and to address any concerns that we might have in performance, and also to learn from the successes and the concerns that we have. This report, as it states in the report, is an interim position, so recognising where we are as a council. We are working on a more comprehensive corporate performance framework for the council, which will be aligned to the new corporate business plan. Until this point, this report sets out a kind of initial set of operational key performance indicators for each executive directorate area. These have been developed in consultation with the executive directors. As part of the new corporate performance framework that will be further developing, there will be a more wide-ranging set of KPIs, along with trend data and targets where appropriate. What you'll see in the report in section 9 is some suggestions for some of those additional key performance indicators. What you have in the appendix is you have more detail around each of the performance indicators we have so far, with RAG ratings and also a narrative from the executive directors. In section 8, there is a summary table which gives you the overview of the performance indicators. In terms of recommendations, executive are asked to endorse this report, but also to consider the level of the content and the level of detail. And the format, and so that we can build that into our future developments in terms of the corporate performance framework, and whether or not the actions in each of the areas are appropriate to address any concerns that you might have.
Very much. Okay. Any comments or questions from lead members? Councillor Ruddle.
Thank you, Chair. If you turn to page 248, you'll see that the key performance indicator for assessments is quite a large backlog. However, this is a national picture, not just for Somerset, and we have rigorous processes in place to begin to reduce this. So I just thought I'd bring it up to your attention.
Thank you very much. Yes, certainly looking forward to that. I had a piece of casework come in yesterday, which was directly related to a delay in assessment, and you think, yep, okay, but it's interesting to see that reflected in the reporting that we've got here, and pleased to know that there's a plan in place on that. Just looking around the room for any other lead member, executive lead, or associate lead member comments. Looking around the room. No, and not seeing anything online. No, I'm sure Councillor Rigby will want to have a criteria that was the number of potholes in Devon compared to Somerset from his comments, and we won't ask you to comment on that. So thank you so much for your report. We look at the recommendations, which are to endorse the first quarter performance management report and as set out, and we are asked to consider whether the proposed actions are adequate and appropriate, and the content, level and detail provided the format report, and make any recommendations for improvement. As we've had no comments on those, I assume that we're happy to progress in the format that's there. Can I see a proposal for the recommendations? Councillor Lysholm, and a seconder. Councillor Dance is. Well, I think
terrible for them.
I'll second. You're not just making a point about the aircon, you are actually seconding it. Okay, thank you very much. Can I see those executive lead members in favour, please? Those against, that's clearly carried. That's clearly carried. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to your team. Okay. And we have the executive forward plan on pages 267 to 276. We're asked to note that forward plan. Are there any comments or questions on it? Not seeing anything in from executive or associate lead members. Nothing in the room that I'm seeing, and nothing online. Sorry, Councillor Redmond, you just started to move towards a microphone, and I got excited that we had a question on the forward programme, but apparently we don't. That being said, can I just thank all officers who have presented today for their contribution to this meeting, and for all members as well. I'm happy to advise you that executive meetings are in the future going to be held at locations around the county, so don't get too comfortable in County Hall is the first point. And I'm delighted to say that the next meeting we are miles and miles away at Dean House. I do. I'm sure we'll enjoy the hospitality of the John Meikle room, and I look forward to us being at points further east in future. Thank you very much for your attendance, everybody. Thank you.